Everyone has heard of Wyatt Earp and Billy the Kid, but the deadliest gunslingers of the Old West were conveniently erased from the movies. In this video, you'll meet the killers who truly terrorized the frontier and learn about the gruesome end each one met. Subscribe now, because Hollywood didn't want you to remember these names. Number 1. John Wesley Hardin, the gunslinger who became a lawyer. He claimed he had killed more men than he could remember. He was born in Texas in 1853, the son of a Methodist preacher who named him after the founder of the church. A cruel irony for someone who would become one of the most feared names in the Old West. Hardin killed his first man at 15 and never stopped. Duel, ambush, or bar fight, it was all the same to him. Over the course of his life, he is said to have taken out dozens of men, including a deputy in a small Texas town, the crime that finally caught up with him. The Texas Rangers caught him on a train in 1877, and the judge sentenced him to 25 years in prison. That was where he did what no one expected. He picked up law books, seriously studied them, and walked out in 1894 with a law license in his pocket, ready to work on the other side of the law. But men like that rarely die of old age. In 1895, at an El Paso saloon, he was shooting dice when John Selman came up behind him and shot him in the back of the head. The gunslinger who had cheated death so many times went down without even seeing who pulled the trigger on him. Number 2. Jim "Killer" Miller, the hired gun. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, and went to church every Sunday. That's why they nicknamed him Deacon Jim. But underneath his dark overcoat, Miller hid a secret: a handmade steel plate strapped to his chest to serve as a bulletproof vest. And he really needed it. Miller killed for money. All someone had to do was pay the price, and he would show up under the cover of darkness to get the job done. No one knows for sure how many men he killed. People say dozens. Always for hire, always in cold blood. His time came in April 1909. Hired to kill a former deputy named Gus Bobbitt, Miller was arrested and thrown in jail in Ada, Oklahoma. But the town didn't want to wait for the trial. An angry mob broke into the jail, dragged Miller and the men who paid him to a barn, and hanged them all right there. They say that before the end, he stared down the mob without flinching and only asked for his hat back. Number 3. Cullen Baker, the swamp gunslinger. Before Billy the Kid or Jesse James became legends, there was already a man many consider the first fast-draw gunslinger of the Old West. Cullen Baker grew up in Texas and, after the Civil War, turned the wetlands between Texas and Arkansas into his hideout. In the swamps of the Sulphur River, he formed a gang and spread fear across the frontier. A Confederate sympathizer, Baker never accepted that the war was over. He hunted down and killed newly freed slaves and anyone who supported the Union during Reconstruction. Robberies, ambushes, and killings followed in his wake for years, and few had the courage to stand up to him. But those who live by violence usually die by it. In January 1869, a former teacher Baker had once tried to hang, gathered a few men, and set a trap. They say he was poisoned before taking the bullets that finally brought his story to an end. Number 4. Wild Bill Longley, the man the noose couldn't kill the first time. In Texas, right after the Civil War, few names struck as much fear as William Preston Longley's. He was quick on the draw, killed without a second thought, and claimed to have left more than 30 men dead, though no one was ever able to confirm that number. But the story people passed around was something else, and it is almost too hard to believe. One time, a group of vigilantes caught Longley, threw a rope around his neck, and hanged him from a tree. When the men started firing into the air before leaving, one of the bullets grazed the rope in just the right spot. The knot gave way, he fell to the ground, and against all odds, survived. He got up, dusted himself off, and kept going, as if death had simply missed its turn. Luck, however, does not last forever. Years later, the law finally caught up with him for a cold-blooded murder. On October 11, 1878, in the town of Giddings, Texas, Bill Longley stepped onto the gallows for the second time in his life. But this time, there was no bullet to cut the rope. Number 5. He had been sheriff of El Paso for only 3 days. 3 days. And that was enough to put Dallas Stoudenmire's name in the history books of the Old West. It was April 14th, 1881. The town was boiling over. 2 Mexican workers had been murdered, and about 75 armed men crossed the border looking for justice. In the middle of all that chaos, a drunk named John Hale grabbed the gun of a former marshal, George Campbell, and killed Deputy Gus Krempkow right there outside the saloon. That was when Stoudenmire stepped in. He heard the gunshots and came running, a revolver in each hand. His first shot went wide and hit an innocent man crossing the street. Then he shot Hale right between the eyes and, right after that, took down Campbell. When the dust settled, 4 men were lying in the dirt street, all in 5 seconds. The shootout made newspaper headlines as far away as New York, but fame like that always comes at a price. The following year, in 1882, Stoudenmire himself went down in a saloon, shot to death by the Manning brothers, who were locked in a blood feud with him. He was only 36 years old. Number 6. King Fisher. In South Texas, no one crossed his path without thinking twice. John King Fisher put up a sign in the middle of the road with a blunt warning, "This is King Fisher's road. Take the other one." And anyone who read it turned around. Fisher was no ordinary outlaw. He wore a decorated hat, a silk shirt, and tooled leather boots, looking more like a stage performer than a gunslinger. But beneath all that flash was a man who drove cattle and commanded rough men better than just about anyone around. Over time, he tried to turn the page. He took a badge, became a deputy sheriff, and seemed ready to leave the past behind. But the past rarely leaves us alone. In March 1884, Fisher passed through San Antonio with his friend Ben Thompson, another major name from the Old West. The two walked into the vaudeville theater to see a show. It was a trap. In the darkness of the audience, gunfire came from all sides. Both men went down right there without a chance to draw their guns. The dandy who ruled the roads of Texas ended his days in a theater seat. Number 7. Ben Thompson. Friends and enemies agreed on one thing. You did not want to be on the other end of his revolver. Born in England in 1843, Ben was still a child when he crossed the ocean and grew up in Texas. He fought for the South in the Civil War and became a professional gambler, the kind who spent his nights in saloons filled with smoke, cards, and trouble. But when his hand went for his gun, everything changed. The famous sheriff Bat Masterson even said that there might not have been anyone more dangerous with a gun than him. The funny thing is that this same man became Austin's chief of police. The hunted man became the law. For a while, the entire city settled down because no outlaw wanted to test his aim. The end came in March 1884 in San Antonio. Ben and his friend King Fisher walked into the vaudeville theater without knowing it was a trap. Men hiding in the upper balcony opened fire. The two never even had a chance to fight back and went down right there, riddled with bullets. The fastest man in the West did not fall in a fair duel. He fell in an ambush, taken down by men who never had the courage to face him head-on. Number 8. Clay Allison, killed by a wagon. Some men of the Old West seemed destined to die with their boots on in a shootout. Robert Clay Allison was one of them. Born in Tennessee, he fought in the Civil War and then headed west, where he raised cattle in New Mexico and Colorado. But cattle were not what made him famous. Allison was the kind of man who settled disagreements with bullets. They say he took part in several duels and left more than one opponent lying in the dust. Some people even swore that he once faced an opponent inside an open grave, agreeing that the winner would bury the loser right there. With a reputation like that, anyone would have bet that he would meet his end in a gunfight. But fate had other plans. In July 1887, near Pecos, Texas, Allison was driving a wagon loaded with supplies. A sack slipped. When he tried to catch it, he lost his balance and fell. The wheel ran over him and broke his neck. The man who survived countless fights died because of a simple fall at the age of 46. No gun, no rival, just a wagon and one moment of bad luck. Number 9. Tom Horn, the gunslinger who became a scapegoat. Few men knew the Old West as well as Tom Horn. He served as an Army scout in the war against the Apaches, worked as a detective for the Pinkerton Agency, and later started selling his shooting skills to the highest bidder. At the end of the 19th century, the big cattle ranchers in Wyoming were at war with small ranchers over land, water, and grazing rights. That was when Horn stepped in, hired to solve problems as quietly as possible, one well-placed bullet from a distance, and no witnesses. But it was not a rival gunslinger who brought Horn down. In 1901, 14-year-old Willie Nickel was shot and killed near his family's ranch. Horn was arrested after allegedly confessing to the crime while drunk to a deputy. He always denied everything. To this day, many people believe that confession was forced out of him and that he took the blame to protect the interests of powerful men. In November 1903, Tom Horn stepped onto the gallows in Cheyenne. He was hanged for a murder he may never have committed. Number 10. Wild Bill Hickok and the Dead Man's Hand. Some cards are worth money, and then there's one that became a symbol of death. James Butler. Hickok, Wild Bill, was one of the most feared names in the Old West. A quick-draw gunman, former lawman, and a legend in his own lifetime, he had one simple rule: never sit with his back to the door. He knew he had too many enemies and that any one of them could walk in shooting at any moment. But on August 2, 1876, at a poker table in Saloon Number 10 in Deadwood, that seat was already taken. For the first time, Bill had to sit with his back to the entrance. That was all it took. A man named Jack McCall walked into the bar, came up behind him, and shot him in the back of the head. Bill died instantly, without time to draw his revolver. McCall claimed it was revenge for his brother's death. He was acquitted the first time, but was eventually tried again, convicted, and hanged the following year. They say Bill was holding 2 aces and 2 eights, all black. From that day on, the combination was given a name that never left the card tables: the Dead Man's Hand. Number 11. John Selman, the Killer of the Killer. Pay attention to this name because his story sounds like a movie script. In August 1895, at a saloon called the Acme in El Paso, Texas, John Selman did what almost no one had the courage to try. He came up behind John Wesley Hardin, one of the most feared gunslingers of that time, and shot him in the back of the head. They say Hardin had dozens of killings under his belt, but he went down before he even understood what was happening. That day, Selman became the man who killed the guy no one else could take down. But life in the Old West came at a high price, and it came fast. Less than a year later, in April 1896, it was his turn. Selman ended up in a dark alley behind an El Paso saloon, face to face with another lawman, George Scarborough. No one knows for sure what the two said in that corner, away from the eyes of the town. What is known is that the shooting started, and Selman was the one left lying on the ground. The man who had taken down a legend died the same way he killed, with a bullet in an alley, with no time to react. Number 12. The truth about gunslingers' aim. Forget what you've seen in the movies. That classic scene, 2 men standing in the middle of a dusty street, hands near their holsters, waiting for the clock to strike noon, almost never actually happened. Records from the time tell a different story. Most Old West shootouts were fast, chaotic, and up close. A lot of the time, the men were only a few steps away from each other, inside a crowded saloon or in a dark alley, and they still missed almost every shot. Gunpowder smoke filled the air, nobody could see clearly, and their hearts were pounding. There was no calmly taking aim. And there's more. Many of those famous duels weren't duels at all. They were straight-up ambushes. One man would wait for the other to come around a corner and shoot him in the back without any warning. Wild Bill Hickok, one of the most legendary names on the frontier, died exactly that way. He was shot in the back of the head while playing cards in a saloon without ever seeing who pulled the trigger. Out there, the key to survival wasn't being the fastest draw. It was simply shooting first, preferably when the other guy wasn't even looking. Number 13. The end of the gunslinger era. Have you ever stopped to think about how these men really ended their days? The truth is very different from what the movies show. By the end of the 19th century, the Old West was changing fast. The telegraph could spread news of a crime within hours, when before, an outlaw could get a head start of several weeks. Railroads stretched across the country and brought people, business, and along with them, the law. Each state began organizing its own police forces, and the small-town sheriff gave way to well-armed, well-paid federal marshals. Little by little, the gunslingers who once ruled became men who no longer fit in. There was no lawless frontier left to run to. By around 1900, that world simply no longer existed, and there was nothing glorious about how most of them ended up. Many went to the gallows after being convicted by a jury. Others spent years rotting behind bars. Some were lynched by angry mobs before they ever got a trial. Few died of old age in their own beds. The legend of the gun-toting hero lived on in books. In real life, the rope and the prison cell had the final say.